to thank you very much and the people, the organizers of this webinar. It is for me a pleasure to join you this afternoon with through this special way we have currently, because this pandemic situation has also a positive thing, which is the way to arrive to many people and through these online possibilities, and also because everybody is really want to join these meetings, because it's an opportunity, and also everybody is working very hard to have all this information online. And yes, this topic has been selected by the organizer is really important, because it's nowadays a hot topic in the children and the infant nutrition and the young children. And I think it's something that it is needed to be much more investigated, and also to research and to define correctly, which is because of that, I am going to begin now. And just to remember you that the concept of complementary foods is considered all liquids or solid foods other than breast milk. These complementary foods, from the nutritional perspective, it is considered as a complement of the nutrients provided by breast milk, but also these complementary foods have also a non-nutritional importance, especially regarding, for example, for the development of cognitive development, behavioral development, or even the induction of tolerance and many other things. Complementary feeding should be considered as with the 3 W: when, what, and why. When, the timing; what, the content of the diet; and how are the feeding practices nowadays, which are being under discussion or are being doing. We have 2 reference papers already outside. One, it is the one I was involved in within the SGAN Committee on Nutrition. We prepared this position paper in 2017 about complementary feeding, and then the current manuscript and the scientific opinion from EFSA, who has been recently published, about the timing and the appropriate age range for introduction of complementary feeding into an infant diet. Within these 2 years, in between these journals, and also more recently some papers and some researchers has been working on these ages, and new data, new information is coming out very interesting, and making everybody thinking about it. Then I want to remember you that if we talk about when it is should begin the complementary feeding, which is the main topic of today, we have to remember that in 2001, WHO said that exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months, followed by the introduction of complementary feedings alongside, continue breastfeeding up to 2 years or beyond, to fill the gap in energy, iron, and other essential nutrients. Then it is already more than 19 years ago, that everybody agrees the need to maintain exclusive breastfeedings at least for 6 months, but then using complementary feeding alongside up to 2 years. In 2017, we tried to address an update of this all information about complementary feeding available in that time, and we finally discussed about this and written down that exclusive of full breastfeeding should be promoted for at least 4 months, so 17 weeks, beginning of the 5th month of life, and exclusive or predominant breastfeeding for approximately 6 months, around 26 up to 26 weeks, the beginning of the 7th month. This is the decidible goal, and this is important. It's timeline, I will explain why. Then the complementary foods, understanding in them as solids and liquids other than breast milk or infant formula, should not be introduced before 4 months, but should not be delayed beyond 6 months. This is something that seems to be similar to the first paragraph, but it's just to remark this idea. To implement the complementary feeding and to begin with it is necessary to have at least 3 important issues. The first is the developmental readiness. That means that the baby is ready to receive this complementary feeding. Also the gastrointestinal and renal development, and the nutritional adequacy of the milk. We have to discuss about this and see, because there are some cases that it is needed to begin earlier. And then I am going to talk also about some health effects and the social and cultural factors, which is also modifying the initiation of the complementary feeding, and the maternal preference sometimes is also modifying this beginning. There are, in terms of anatomical issues, there are different changes which is happening in the oral cavity, that it is should be ready to receive the spoon and the complementary feeding. And these changes who begins first, the baby has first all facilities to be breastfed. Then it begins to change with the growth of this area and the development. And also it is important to know that there is a disappearance or diminution of the reflexes present at birth. Those who coordinate the suckling, the swallowing, and the respiration, and in favor of more voluntary movements. This is essential for the baby to receive the complementary feeding. And then also it is important in the development of gross motor skills in terms of the maintenance of the head and the trunk, to allow an improved movement of the jaw in terms of to maintain the good position, and also fine motor skills from the lip, the tongue of the jaw movements, who help to receive this complementary feeding. If we take into account all these steps, the optimal introduction seems to be around 4 to 6 months, because in that moment we have already improved the tongue mobility, because the cortical and cognitive development associated with increasing of the oral cavity volume, as I expressed, the progressive control of oral food transport, the motor skills required to accept and swallow the puree from the complementary feeding, and beyond the 6 months, we have also already the appearance of temporary inferior and superior incisors, also to handle the beating, the motor skill, to handle semi-solid foods or to self-feeding. The infant in between 9 to 12 months already can drink from a cup using both hands. The infant can eat in family foods with some adaptations. And also from 12 to 18 months, there is again another tooth development, the molars, who will improve also intra-oral food mixing ability, and this will help too much to progress with the type of food and the eating. But then there are some kind of influences, like the texture of the food, which is depends on the texture, the baby is ready or not. So the age range at which infants will attain developmental milestones shows considerable variation between one child and another, and within and also between populations. It is also there are genetic factors there. And this allows to reflect the infant's innate developmental trajectory and opportunities, experiences provided also by the carer and the situation of this baby. It is also to notice that important to notice that the premature infants develop the milestones for feeding at the corrected ages, and depending on the severity of the illness he has experienced during the neonatal period, also the gestational age, the degree of prematurity, and also if they have had some kind of sequelae because the treatment received and the time spent in the unit of intensive care. Then it has been also addressed by several researchers that the critical, and also by the ESGAN Committee on Nutrition, we agreed to say that the critical window for introducing lumpy solid foods, it should be not earlier than 9 months, between 9 and 10 months of age. That at 7 to 8 months, parents should introduce also the finger food forms, while it is prolonged, because it will prolong much more. The pureed foods should have not very good effects a long term, sorry, and so it is better just to begin with the finger food forms. And the introduction of the folly foods at later age, it has been also related to feeding difficulties and unhealthy eating habits, who has been shown in many babies in different countries. This is the revision who has performed the expert group of the EFSA, and sorry, the expert group from EFSA. And as you can see here, in which they have reviewed all the literature about this, and they have seen how more or less all the head in midline in supine position happens around between the 3rd to 4 months. So because based on this this knowledge, they have already made the new recommendations to consume the spoon-fed puree of the complementary feeding. And as you can see here, regarding the self-fed finger foods, again, they have reviewed everything already published, and they see that, for example, sitting in lab without support or sitting alone should happen around 5 to 6 months. So with this, they have established the new recommendation, both for spoon-fed purees or for self-fed finger foods. So they have developed this recommendation saying that regarding the developmental readiness, 3 to 4 months is there are already earliest gross motor skill, which indicates the developmental readiness for the babies, and they are ready to receive a spoon feeding of purees for complementary feedings, because they have already routine and instruction reflexes are diminished in these infants, and so they are ready to receive this. Then some infants at 4 months, but commonly between 5 to 7 months of age, they have already development of gross motor skill, and they are ready to receive self-feeding finger foods. On the other side, we have also the gastrointestinal and renal function. We have to know that the human gut anatomically and functionally is already mature at birth in the healthy term infant, but still the secretion and activity of the gastric and pancreatic enzymes are not well developed up to adult levels. And so it is maturing alongside the first years and different rates. And so it is different, there are differences between children, between infants. And then the ingested food, it is important to know that it depends on the type of food we are offering to the baby. This maturation of the gastric and the pancreatic enzyme will change and will be stimulated by these foods. Then we have also the renal control of water and balance, which is not fully developed at birth as well. But the rate of the renal water excretion will be influenced by the solute load to be excreted. And finally, as renal concentrated capacity is limited in babies in the neonatal period, if we offer a high solute load, will result in rapid and profound alteration in water balance, so it should be taken into account. It should be taken. So, but what the EFSA group have reported, it is that, by the way, when after the development of the neurodevelopmental skills and the skills and readiness, the gastrointestinal and renal functions are really not a limiting factor because with respect to the timing of complementary food, because all this neurodevelopment has already been developed by the timing that we need to introduce the complementary feeding. So even if the baby needs further months to get a full development of this gastric and pancreatic enzymes and also the microbiota and so on, really this is not a limiting factor to introduce the complementary feeding. On the contrary, it will help to promote this development. Then we have also the concept of the idea, if it is exclusive breastfeeding, it is adequate, nutritionally adequate to have a long-term feeding. Exclusive breastfeeding is adequate up to 6 months of age for the majority of the healthy infants. But if their mothers are well nourished, and all children will meet perfectly with the breastfeeding, then the human milk, the energy, protein, fatty acids, and also most of the vitamins and minerals necessary for their growth and development, except for vitamin K and vitamin D. But we do not know exactly we cannot say for every child, for every baby, that the age at which exclusive breastfeeding will be sufficient in energy and in nutrients availability for everybody. So that this must be decided individually. This is a concept who has been written now everywhere in this two new recommendations document, because it's very important. We need to know all other influencing factors to decide if exclusive breastfeeding is okay, or if the child will need further supplements or further complement or a complementary feeding to fulfill the needs. Also, it is important to know that the timing of introduction varies considerably between low and higher income countries, and also because the cultural habits. It's even within Europe, we have also many differences, but if we check around the world, there are many differences between low and high income countries, but also the cultural habits. And we know that only 77% of the infants under 6 months of age in the low-income countries are exclusively breastfed, and the introduction of the complementary feeding used to be earlier than in high-income countries. 1 to 3 months of life, these babies are already beginning to receive complementary feeding. Regarding the health effects of exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months versus 3 to 4 months, there are many different studies trying to address information about if it is better or is not better regarding the health outcomes in regards to obesity, iron deficiency, celiac disease, allergy, infections, and others. There are several information. Here I bring to you this randomized control trial comparing 4 to 6 months of exclusive breastfeeding, and they did not show any difference in total energy intake, growth, body composition, or developmental scores. This agrees also with the new recommendation from EFSA. EFSA said that with high level of confidence, after review every data available, there was no effect of introduction of complementary feeding at complementary foods at 3 to 4 months of age compared to 6 months of age. No effect on body weight, body length, head circumference, BMI, and body composition. No effect on the risk of developing celiac disease. No effect on iron status at 10 to 12 months of age. But here, there are some kind of issues we are going to talk about. It depends on the populations. Then the EFSA has reported these ideas from 42 publications, 5 randomized clinical trials, and 30 prospective cohort studies, and 2 pulse analysis of prospective studies and 6 retrospective studies. And regarding the body weight, body length, height, and head circumference, and they say that the main line of evidence, it is that there is no evidence for an association between the time of introduction of complementary feeding, weight, length, height, and head circumference, assessed up to the age of 7, 9, and 3 years respectively. But there are a significant association between early introduction of complementary feeding and higher body weight and body length and height in childhood. There are 4 studies showing these results. And there are higher conditional weight gain, between 2 and 14 months of age associated to the introduction of complementary feeding before 4 months of age compared with thereafter. So the timing of introduction of complementary feeding and risk of childhood obesity that has been explored in a systematic review from Danielson in 2015, including 26 studies, 1 randomized clinical trial, and 5 large high-quality studies, and they show no association between age and introduction of solids and later anthropometry or risk of obesity. And there are really an increased risk with introduction of solids before 4 months. So they say there is really not a very important effect because the introduction of complementary feeding earlier than 6 months. But if you introduce the solid food below 4 months, you have then an increased risk of obesity. The EFSA has explored then in these effects of the introduction of complementary feeding below 6 months of age regarding BMI, body composition, and overweight and obesity, and they have addressed that there is no evidence for an association between the timing of introduction of complementary feeding regarding BMI, fat mass, or the odds of developing overweight and obesity, as I said, up to 15 years. So that means that if you really introduce the complementary feeding below 6 months, then between 4 to 6 months, there will not be a harmful effect on regarding this obesity risk. In respect to iron, it has been shown that more prolonged exclusive breastfeeding is associated with greater risk of iron deficiency in later infancy. And it has been seen that perhaps infants who receive complementary feeding from 4 months of age have higher iron stores at 6 months versus those receiving exclusive breastfeeding for 6 months. So this is a study of Chantry and et al. And just Dottir, and the question is that in this case they show this effect, but they really both groups have the adequate stores, and so the practical significance of this result was not clear. Then the EFSA has explored this with caution, and they decided to recommend as follows: the introduction of complementary feeding, complementary foods that are source of iron, because this is an important remark, should be complementary foods that are source of iron at 4 months of age versus those versus 6 months, will reduce the risk of iron depletion at 6 months of age in exclusive breastfed infants at risk of iron depletion. Who are these babies who are really at risk of iron depletion? Okay, so they describe that these babies will be the exclusive breastfed infants born to mothers who had low iron status. Those babies who are exclusive breastfed with early umbilical cord clamping, less than 1 minute after birth. Those who has born preterm or small for gestational age, or infants showing high growth velocity. This is very interesting. So infants showing high growth velocity during the first months will develop iron deficiency. And if they are exclusively breastfed, should receive this supplement, as the same that those who have been, for instance, small for gestational age, preterm, etc. Then the timing of introduction of complementary feeding and allergy has been also a matter of discussion for many years. It has been shown that increasing allergy rates, despite advice to avoid or delay the introduction of potentially allergenic foods, it is happening. So it doesn't matter if you delay or avoid some kind of allergic foods. The question is that at the end, there are no differences in this. And it has created a very big discussion along the time. And it is there is a question here because we don't know if it is we need to do a primary prevention, because it seems that the early exposure to food allergens will create tolerance, and then in that way they will reduce allergy. And there has been some studies trying to address this question, this important issue. And finally, the timing of, we decided that the timing of allergenic food introduction is not associated with other allergic outcomes, that the findings may not be generalizable, may beyond all food allergy mediated by IgE antibodies, IgE, but there are some kind of new data coming out about this information, and what is being seen that perhaps is a reverse causality. So at the beginning, we thought that it was better to delay or to avoid these foods, these allergy foods. But nowadays, we begin to understand that probably the immune system at early ages, it is still more plastic than we thought, and probably the early introduction of some allergenic foods may develop some tolerance to these foods, and then the children, the babies, will not develop the illness. In this way, there are many studies already exploring different, the most common allergen foods. And here, for example, you have the EAT study, and you have in Australia and Germany different ones exploring, for example, the eggs. Okay, here there are many of them exploring the eggs, and as you can see here, the outcome was the atopic dermatitis and the egg sensitization or egg allergy, and also there are some kind of studies here, the lip and the peanut, exploring the peanut allergy. And really the results are, as I am saying, contradictory, because it seems that if we delay the introduction of these foods, these allergy foods, probably we will have the illness development. So the egg trials, there are 5 to 6 trials suggesting that it is possible to induce tolerance to egg and reduce egg sensitization and allergy if the infant is able to tolerate and consume the product earlier. And there is a high baseline sensitization and risk of adverse reactions on first exposure, especially with the raw egg products. But because of that, it is being prepared other ways with the eggs, and for example, the cooked egg in food form, or also some kind of powder or whatever. But it is true that the raw egg it is especially difficult because it could there is a higher risk to develop adverse reaction. So we can combine, for example, the skincare, eczema treatment, and egg exposure, and this will be beneficial to develop this tolerance. Then the peanut prevention, it has been also addressed in an important addendum guidelines. And for example, here we have when the child has severe eczema and allergy or both, mild to moderate eczema or no eczema, different recommendations are being addressed. And as you can see here, all the researcher recommends to introduce from 4 to 6 months or around 6 months of age the peanut in order to avoid the allergy. So the conclusion about this peanut is these allergenic foods may be introduced when complementary feed is commenced anytime after 4 months, but it's not necessary to delay more. That infants at high risk of peanut allergy, those with severe eczema, egg allergy, or both, should have peanut introduced between 4 and 11 months following an evaluation by appropriate trained specialists, and should not be done without control. Okay, so children who has a problem. And on the other side, we have also the issue relating to the timing of allergenic food introduction in the infant diet and the risk of allergic or autoimmune disease. And here in this very good systematic review and meta-analysis, they demonstrate that there is a moderate certain evidence that early egg introduction at 4 to 6 months was associated to reduce egg allergy risk, as you can see here in the graph. And also there is also moderate to certain introduction to between 4 to 11 months is associated to a reduced peanut allergy. And because of that, our recommendations. Then we have also the issue about atopic disease, asthma-like symptoms. And at the moment, the EFSA said that with the data available, we have 6 randomized clinical trial for 45 prospective cohort study and 21 retrospective, 92 publications, but still there are no association between the timing of introduction of complementary feeding and the odds and the risk to develop atopic disease or asthma-like symptoms up to 7 years of age. All the children has been followed up at 7 years. In regards to the celiac disease, some years ago, Dr. Hania Sajeska published this and recommend this idea that in the absence of clear evidence, in order to decrease the risk of later celiac disease, it is reasonable to avoid both early and late, more than 7 months, the introduction of gluten. And the introduction of gluten should be done still when the baby is still being breastfed. This idea was maintained for years, and it was considered that it was better to introduce the gluten while the baby were breastfed. But then after several years, 2 years after, the Prevent CD and the CELIPREF projects demonstrated that there is not this association, and the gluten, and because of that, the SGAN Committee on Nutrition, we decided to recommend that the gluten may be introduced into the infant's diet anytime between 4 to 12 months of age. That neither any breastfeeding nor breastfeeding, doesn't matter if the baby is breastfeeding or not, during gluten introduction has been shown to reduce the risk of complementary celiac disease. And but there were also an issue who were under discussion. It was the consumption of large quantities of gluten and the amount, the real amount needed. And so we decided to recommend that it should be avoided, these large quantities of gluten during the first week, and also even during infancy, because the optimal amounts of gluten have not been still established. Nowadays it's not still established. But again, here we have another a new study showing the contrary of this discussion, this thinking, because this EAT study has demonstrated that if you introduce the gluten from age 4 months, so earlier than 6 months, this was associated with reduced celiac disease prevalence. And also they suggest an early high dose consumption of gluten because we need to think about this, and with the idea I told before, because probably this plasticity of the immune system, it is they're driving the immune system development, and they suggest that the early high dose consumption of gluten should be considered as a strategy to prevent the celiac disease. So this is now it is being also discussed with the EFSA, and but they have still many data for that. But anyway, they have recommend the same, to introduce the gluten at the same time than other complementary foods, and between 4 to 6 months is also feasible. It's possible. And there is no risk also for other food allergens. But this recommendation probably are for low-risk infants. We need further studies to understand this concept in infants who had other potential risk factors. But we have addressed that there is no need to delay the introduction after 4 months, but we need to resolve the acceptability by the infant, by the parent, by the healthcare professional, because there are some people who think that it is too early. And we need probably to do a screening of which children with infants are able to receive this complementary feeding, or should delay a little bit. And also it is important to arrive to an exact dose and duration to induce the tolerance, because we don't know how it will work in every child. Then we have a topic of infections, and we have seen, it has been shown that the more prolonged exclusive breastfeeding is associated with lower risk of pneumonia, ear infections, hospitalization for infection, gastrointestinal infection, or upper respiratory tract infection. And there were also a millennium birth cohort in UK who showed how exclusive breastfeeding protects against hospitalization for infection. But this protection is because breast milk and infant formula increases the risk, but solid foods do not increase the risk of hospitalization. So then also the IT study showed that there were no differences between the randomized groups they do with the complementary feeding, and they conclude that the introduction of solid alongside feeding may be associated with less risk of infection than introduction of infant formula in higher income settings. So it's really contradictory ideas that now it is becoming to be more important concept there about this plasticity of the immune system, and that it seems not to be a risk to begin earlier than 6 months with the complementary feeding. So the EFSA concludes that when hygienic conditions are satisfactory, there is no evidence of an increased risk of when we begin with the complementary feeding earlier than 6 months of age. There is no increased risk of gastrointestinal infection, lower respiratory tract infections, or infection in general. No evidence of upper respiratory tract infection, and there is insufficient data for conclusions. Regarding eating patterns, we have to, you may know that eating patterns are established during these these 2 years of life, the first 2 years of life, and the previous, also at the same time of the complementary feeding introduction. And in that moment, the infants learn about what, when, and how much to eat. And they experience their own experience itself of eating, and also the observation of other people, and they establish their eating behaviors. There is also a transmission of cultural and familiar beliefs, attitudes, and practices around the food and eating. And so all this area, it is very important to establish the eating behavior. There are many factors influencing the development and the programming of eating behavior. It's a long process, and it is established a pattern eating behavior, and it will continue later beyond the toddlerhood. So we need to know that the introduction of the complementary feeding, the pure and soft solids and family food solids and so on, this sensory experience observation, but also all the family, the environment, everything, and also the biology and behavior behind it is will impact on this development of eating behavior. The development of taste and food preferences happens in a transition period between exclusive meal diet to solid diet. There is an inborn preference for sweet in the babies, salty and umami tastes, and not for sour and bitter taste. And this change around 6 months, according to the dietary experience. So it is very important to have a good dietary experience in these states. Infants should be offered then foods with a variety of flavors and textures, including bitter tasting green vegetables, in order to change these preferences. And young infants show a high predilection for energy-dense foods rather than healthy foods, and this may have a risk of overweight and obesity at early ages. And there is a genetic base strongly who drives strongly the taste and the food preference. And this can be also modified by early nutrition experiences. And so it is influencing all the parents and the food we offer and so on. There are the innate preferences for sweet and salty flavors may be modified or reinforced by early feeding experience. Normally, all the studies do not specifically focus on the complementary feeding period, and this is a missing, an important missing information. So now it is becoming more and more important, this period, to explore this, how to drive this eating behavior. The preferences for healthy foods can be developed, of course, and the infant is exposed to an intervention with greater variety of vegetables during complementary feeding will also then consume greater variety as each years old. So it has been shown also that, for example, the parents who establish a strict, are very strict with the food during the first periods of the introduction of complementary feeding, and they introduce these flavors and reinforce the healthy food, then the outcomes will be better, and the baby will accept a healthier food. There are also these genetic impacts, and we have to know that, for example, regarding appetite, it is very heritable, highly heritable. And for example, 84% of the slowness of eating, it is heritable by the children, by the babies. The satiety responsiveness in 72%, the food responsiveness in 59%, and the enjoyment of food 53%. So there are really a very genetic impact. So then we have environment, we have infant factors, we have to understand that the main source of nutrients is the milk, and all the cultural issues, habits, and the influence of the different things make us understand or conclude that we need an individualized approach for a good complementary feeding, and also about the content of this complementary feeding. Regarding the protein energy ratio is low during breastfeeding and increased rapidly with the complementary feeding. It has been seen that the percentage of energy between 15 to 15.7 with the complementary feeding and between 9 to 12 months, it is a very important risk factor for later obesity. And then it is suggested to provide to the infants high quality protein during this first year of life, but also during the second year of life to prevent obesity. This is Professor Michelsen, here Professor Hornell as well. Dr. Hornell explained that the higher protein intake in infancy and early childhood is also associated to the increase of growth and higher BMI in childhood, and the percentage at 12 months of age should not be in these baby children they explore. It was this percentage of energy was between 15 to 20%, so it should be lower probably. The cow's milk is a poor source of iron. It's very high in protein, and so we do not. This cow's milk will not be used as a main meal drink before 12 months. And also, all dairy products should be limited, not to bring the babies, because it's very easy to bring the baby these dairy products, and we have not to bring them, to give them a lot of dairy products, because this will be also associated to obesity and other illnesses. And then regarding the content in general, we need to continue with the breastfeeding alongside the complementary feeding. The infant should be offered foods with a variety of flavors and texture, including bitter tasting, green vegetables, but not sugar, no salt should be added to the complementary feeding. And the fruit juices or sugar sweetened beverages should be avoided completely during the first year or even the first 2 years of life. All infants should receive iron-rich complementary feeding, including meat products and iron-fortified foods, also complementary foods that provide iron. And those children submitted to the vegan diet should only be used under appropriate medical or dietary supervision in order to not fail on the nutrition supply, and perhaps they need supplementation. The method of feeding has been also a matter of research and a matter of discussion, and we have the traditional way, but the baby-led is taking also some kind of advantages. But you should know that there has been also publications saying that the baby-led weaning, it could be also, it's associated to more iron deficiency and so on. But there are now some ideas. It's an intermediate method, which is called BLISS, and it is also being promoted. The most important thing is that the parents should be encouraged to respond to their infant's hunger and satiety cues, and to avoid feeding to comfort or as a reward. This is very important. The food should be of the appropriate consistencies for age and stage of development. Avoid prolonged use of bottles already prepared. Safe practices for food preparation and storage is essential to maintain health of the babies. And the timing conclusion are that the single age for the introduction of complementary feeding for infants living in Europe cannot be established, and I think all over the world. That the appropriate age range depends on the individual's characteristics and development, especially if they was born prematurely. If foods are given in a age-appropriate texture, nutritionally appropriate, and also prepared according to good hygienic practices, there is no convincing evidence that the early introduction of complementary foods will be associated to adverse or beneficial health effects, except for infants at risk of iron depletion. For different nutritional reasons, the majority of infants need the complementary foods from around 6 months of age, and from preterm infant, this refers to post-term age. And there is no reason to postpone the introduction of potentially allergenic foods. This is a very important conclusion at this moment, and I think that for the future we will have a lot of results regarding this topic. This is the Committee on Nutrition I was working in that moment, in 2017, I was working with, and we said that also that we consider benefits and risks and maternal preferences, and there are different depending on setting, that one size fits all approach is not desirable or sensible, that we need to bring the baby, to give the babies a good source of iron and zinc, avoid excessive cow's milk consumption, and no add sugars, and have a good responsibility of the feeding of your baby. And this is all. That's all. And I forgot to put for you a photo from Granada, Spain, and I hope you have been visiting our nice city. Probably you know very well. And thank you very much for your attendance and for your attention here this evening. For you, it's very late here, it's a little bit earlier. And I understand that you will be tired and so on. So I thank you very much for.
Professor Christina, thank you so much for such informative and fruitful discussion. Really, the information that we got are beneficial, are new, they are the latest. You got many questions. We'll try to cover as much as we can in the Q&A session. First of all, let me also thank Professor Manal Abdel Gawad, who's the Professor of Pediatrics at Alexandria University, Egypt, Pediatric Consultant at the University Medical Center, Al Qura University in Mecca, KSA. I would like to thank also Professor Ahmad Bakr, who's a consultant pediatrician and neonatologist. He's a professor of pediatrics and neonatology in the University of Alexandria, Egypt, a pediatric department in Al Ahli Hospital, Doha, Qatar. So now, professors, I'm going to leave the floor for the Q&A session. We'll start by Professor Ahmad. Please start. Let's start the Q&A session.
Hey, Dr. Christina, that was really very good and informative, and it seems that we have received lots of questions from our audience.
Thank you.
So I will pose a couple of questions, and probably will convey to you also a couple of questions from the audience. And one of the topics topics you have covered is related to the timing of the introduction of solid food. And you did mention that if the introduction is delayed, that could be associated with some difficulties. Can you explain more about that? Why it would be associated with more difficulties if we delay it?
Okay, so what is known, it is that this if you delay later than 7 months or beyond, then you will have some kind of difficulties for adaptation of the baby to the solid food. And this will lead to maintain the baby having more liquids or puree for longer time. And this is also associated to the neurodevelopment, because as the beginning of the life in this of this period, it is also a stimulus. The solid food is also a stimulus for tooth development, but on neurodevelopment, motor skills development. But also nowadays it is under study also the effect on gut microbiota development. So we have many different reasons why to recommend
not to delay
solution area. Yeah, not to go. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Professor Manal.
Thank you very much, Dr. Christina, for this fruitful and comprehensive lecture. Let me ask you about a very important thing. As you said, the neurodevelopmental axis of the GIT and the renal and the, all systems needs needs to be completely developed much more before we start complementary feeding, in order to avoid a very serious complaint, which is a choking attack. In your opinion, what is the time for I can give the child finger food and at the same time avoid?
Okay, so the conclusion from all the discussion we have had and the studies already published is that we need to individualize. So you need to see if the baby has already achieved the skills, the neurodevelopmental skills correctly to give the solid food. So the puree, it is okay from 4 to 6, but you are talking about the solid food. And the solid food, because of that, it has been developed this idea of the finger food which is made also with a very soft product, but in this form, which is easier for the baby to avoid this choking and this thing. So as soon as the baby has developed the skills of to have also to be in a seated position correctly without help and so on, and they have also not these difficulties to slow and so on, it is possible to try to do so. But you have to individualize. Every child, every baby will be different, and it is important also to have on mind all the background of the baby and how it's growing on, how it is developing neurologically, and yes, and fulfill things. But the recommendations is between 5 to 7 months. So that means that some infants can begin with the solids at 6, and other ones need to wait till 7 or even a little bit more.
Great. I do have a question from one of our audience, Dr. Nada Habbani. She was asking about the introduction of complementary feeding. If it's done early enough, are there any records of complications like intussusception, for example?
Sorry?
Our colleague is asking about the early introduction of solid food, and if there has been some records of complications like intussusception.
Intussusception? So,
okay, I don't know what is it in Spanish, but intussusception. You remember with the when the rotavirus vaccine was given in the beginning, it was on the market because of the intussusception complication.
Yeah, I understand right now. Okay, so at the moment there is no conclusive data about that. There is no data who confirm this relationship. As I said before, it is necessary to individualize. You have to know very well the background of the baby. For example, you have had a baby who has been having, I don't know, gastroenteritis in the first months of life, or you have been treated with antibiotics or other issues. So then you have to be perhaps be more careful with this baby. But or if it has other complications at gastrointestinal level, if it is well developed but it has these complications, perhaps you have to see if the baby is able to begin earlier or you have to delay. But here what we're trying to address is that the recommendation it is in general for the healthy baby not to delay is not necessary, because there are no data indicating that we will have a problem. But another thing it is that it could happen if a baby have first other problems. But there is no data, conclusive data to say if you begin, you can have this problem. There is not a clear association with this.
Great.
Okay, Professor Cristina, another important question from the floor, which is also a question from the mother. This is which age we can add salt and sugar to the complementary foods?
Yes, yes, we have also worked on this in another paper, a position paper, perhaps you know also, and we conclude that there is no need for sugar, added sugar. We talk always about added sugar. If you give a fruit with the natural fruit and sugar or the fruit, it's okay. The problem is when you add the sugar. So you have not to add sugar, not to add salt to the food. It's not necessary. If you add too much sugar to the food, you are changing also your microbiota, you are changing the food preferences, development, you are changing many things, the taste and so on. So the babies do not need that. They are exploring and different flavors, different tastes. And if you maintain this diversity in the food and you give them a lot of vegetables and fruits and so on, they will rationalize the different foods, and finally they will develop correctly the patterns for eating behavior and also for food preferences, which is very important at this stage. We prepare them for the future correctly to prefer a healthy food. So no salt, no sugar. Even our recommendation is that below 2 years, not added sugar, not salt, it should be given. It doesn't matter if one day you give a snack or whatever sweet to the baby. This could be okay, but only as very rare situation. Not every day, and not to habituate to this kind of flavors and taste.
Okay. We in clinical practice, we used to say that babies who are exclusively breastfed, we pay attention to the iron supplementation. And my practice, for example, once the babies double their birth weight, they approach 4 months of age, we think of supplementing some iron. So do you agree with that? You supplement iron, or you rely on the solid food to supplement the iron, and how much iron would you give in such a case?
Okay, so the perspective is okay. So those baby, this is one of the remarks I wanted to address. Those babies who are growing so fast, probably they will develop anemia, and they will need this support. So what was being seen, it is that it's much better if you introduce the complementary feeding, even if it is exclusive breastfed, with foods who are enriched, also foods that are source of iron. If you enrich with these complementary foods, you will probably solve the problem. The option to give supplements, pharmacological supplements, is also there if it's possible. The only thing is that it has been shown that these supplements it is not the same that present in the natural food. When you give the foods, iron food in the foods, the absorption, it will be much better. So you will increase the level of iron in a better natural way, and also you will not damage so much the microbiota. Some babies, as you know, when you give the supplements of iron, become with constipation or diarrhea and do not accept very well, because the absorption and the effect on the gut is quite different. So the best option is to begin to introduce the complementary feeding with the type of foods that are source of iron, and then you will get much more effectiveness in the control of anemia in these babies.
Okay.
Another important question, Professor Cristina, is related to the pandemic of COVID-19. If the mother catches COVID-19 infection, still exclusive breastfeeding is safe for her infant?
Yes, absolutely. At the moment, we don't know exactly what is happening. We are beginning to explore the presence of COVID in human milk and how it is acting in the guts of the baby. We don't know still. We are now, I am already involved in a project in Spain with multi-center study exploring this COVID in human milk. But at the moment, we know that the baby, if the mother is positive in the last moment of the pregnancy, in the last period, and arrive to the delivery positive, then the virus is there, but not for many time. It's not for a lot of time. And it seems not to have a clear effect on the baby, a harmful effect very clear on the baby. So the question now is that we are recommending to continue with the breastfeeding these babies, because as you know, the human milk has also other factors, immune factors and so on, which the baby needs very, very much in this situation, especially in this situation. And at the moment, we are not recommending to avoid the exclusive breastfeeding. On the contrary, to give the breastfeeding. But still, is something that it is not very clear.
Doctor, some babies who are considered to be on the high range of growth velocity, or between brackets, obese babies, would you still recommend the introduction of solid food at the same timing like other babies who grow in the middle, or would you change your recommendations regarding the timing if these babies are obese?
Okay, so these babies who are already infants, obese infants, very, very small infants already obese, as you know perfectly, these are already programmed. Has had intrauterine programming effect on of the adipose tissue already. So it is very difficult to control these babies with the food and so on. The question here it is that in the next future we are thinking that there will be also the possibility to treat them with probiotics, some specific probiotics who make the change their gut microbiota into a better, a more healthy microbiota. And with this, with the food and the microbiota, trying to control a little bit their growth. But the recommendation I have presented is only, and the evidence is only for healthy children, healthy infants, not for those who are already obese. There are nothing about that. And from my perspective, I think that if you fulfill their energy needs, it doesn't too much matter if you give solid foods, or even more, if you give solid foods, perhaps you can help them to develop a healthier microbiota, because if the solid foods is a healthy foods, perhaps you can help them. So it's not, there is no evidence about that, but what you have to do is not to give a lot of food or a lot of energy intake, not to increase the energy intake. And also regarding the percentage of the energy, the protein, to control the protein under 15, not too low, but not in between 15 to 20%, a little bit below 15. Perhaps this is a way to control a little bit. But anyway, they will need to grow. They have their basal needs and also the needs for growth, and you cannot avoid the food. But you can begin also with solid foods and other complementary feeding, but not increasing the supply of proteins, for example.
Dr. Christina, as you said, cystic for celiac disease, you prefer to start gluten diet during the breastfeeding from 4 to 12 months. Shall we start with gluten-free diet from the start to avoid?
No. Okay, no. What I said is that the first studies and the systematic review performed from Dr. Hani Sajeska in 2012, they were recommending to begin with the gluten while the baby were breastfeeding. And that was the recommendation. But then it has been demonstrated that it doesn't matter if the baby is breastfeeding or not. The question is that nowadays we know that we can begin with the allergenic foods, including gluten, before. If you begin from 4 to 6 months, perhaps it's much better than if you delay it, because this plasticity of the immune system during these months will lead to tolerance. And then you can determine a tolerance, and this baby will not develop the illness. So as you know, with other foods happen the same. You have, for example, babies who develops the cow's milk protein allergy, and then after one time they develop the tolerance, and you can begin to give a little bit amount of cow's milk, and then they goes ahead and can drink milk, cow's milk again a little bit. So the idea now it is that you can develop the tolerance earlier in life, and not to wait, not to delay the introduction of this food allergy, because otherwise you will create another pathways in your immune system response that will lead to the development of the celiac disease. So gluten, it can be introduced from 4 to 6 months. Then we said that not very big amounts, even quantity of gluten during the first year. But now the latest results even are planning or trying to address that the importance of to give perhaps for the future, we should plan to give higher amounts of gluten in early life to induce this tolerance. And probably this is the way. I am confident that I believe on that.
I do have to agree with that, because there's recently a great paradigm shift in thinking from avoiding sensitization to developing tolerance. So it's really better to help the development of tolerance rather than shying away from introducing the solid food and avoiding the sensitization. And this brings me to the next question that I have seen that lots of the audience have been posing about babies with a strong family history of allergy, or if they develop, for example, eczema at early stage of life. Would this make you change some of the recommendations in such group regarding the introduction of the solid food?
Yes, this has been, as you have seen in my presentation, a matter of discussion, a big discussion on that. And the recommendation is that the eggs can be also administered earlier, but perhaps if these babies are under very high risk, you can do a prick test or a skin test, and then evaluate the situation. And if not, you can taste with a little amount of eggs, but earlier in life. And then if you see that this goes well, you can continue with the eggs, but from earlier. It's again the same idea. It is to create this tolerance and to avoid the development of the allergy. It's exactly the same.
Great, yeah, I totally agree.
Yes, Professor Cristina, this is regarding the allergy. Another important question from the floor regarding diabetes mellitus. Is there any correlation between the timing of complementary feeding and the appearance of diabetes in children?
Yes, this is an history which is not clear, because as you know, you are probably talking about type 1 diabetes. And yes, it's an autoimmune disease, and also diabetes, another autoimmune disease, it is also modulated by or driven by different factors. And again, the development of the early development of the immune system, it is influenced by many different factors. I am not sure about diabetes, if the role of this early complementary feeding on diabetes. The discussions were there as well, and the EFSA at the moment say that there is no convincing evidence on the role of anticipate the introduction of complementary feeding and the association with the higher risk to develop type 1 diabetes, and nor association, nor evidence, sorry, with the higher risk for other autoimmune diseases. So at the moment, there is no information at all. We need to do further studies to confirm this potential influence, but there is nothing there.
I did see a couple of questions from the audience about introducing vitamins. What about that?
The vitamins, you mean?
Right.
Okay. Well, from my point of view, the most important thing, because the vitamins, you mean as a supplement, no?
Right, correct, as a supplement.
Yeah, supplements. Okay. So my perspective on that, it is that we should use the supplements of vitamin D, but other ones, if you do a correct nutrition, it is probably not necessary. So it will depend individually of the baby, on the conditions of the situation of the family, of the type of food they are given, the quality of protein, the quality of food that the baby is receiving. So you probably can change this and supplement for specifically for those vitamins you may understand or see that probably are needed. But for on the other side, at the moment, it is not needed. There is nothing that should convince or evidence, scientific evidence that say that you have to give polyvitaminics in infancy. In infants, is not needed because also for example, if the baby is exclusive breastfed, the human milk provides all vitamins and minerals necessary for a healthy teen baby, except for vitamin D. But the rest of vitamins are correct. And then if you introduce the complementary food, you will have also the source of vitamins there. And other things, if the baby is fed with the infant formula used to have a higher amount of vitamins,
right,
and supply as well all the vitamins. So it's not necessary.
Yeah, I think that was great, and you really covered nearly all aspects that came to the minds of the audience. And I think Linda can wrap up and give us the message.
I want to address only one thing, sorry, because I forgot first when you asked me about the sugar. I forgot to mention also about the sweet beverage. Not sweet beverage for children as well, for infants, okay? Infants up to 2 years do not have to drink sweet beverages, anyone. This is really very important because I don't know in your country, but here we are seeing that babies after 1 year begin to ask for this kind of beverages or fruit juices, which are also added sugar, and they begin to change their taste, and they begin to not want to eat other things and become very malnourished, and they arrive to the hospital in bad conditions. So this is an issue that should be encouraged to the families and parents not to give the children and the young children and the babies any sweetened drink. Okay.
Dr. Christina, Professor Manal, Professor Ahmad, thank you so much for your engagement, for your discussion, and for such wonderful presentation and information.